Hi there and welcome back. Let's focus on atrial abnormal rhythm today and precisely atrial tachy arrhythmia. So in medical literature, my friends, broadly speaking, atrial tachy arrhythmia or cardia are categorized into three scenarios. One is atrial tachy. Okay, so let me draw a heart here. This is the SA node, AV node. So atrial tachy is one broad classification where the atrium fires and the heart rates are in the range of somewhere about 125 to 150 beats per minute. The second classification is Atrial Flutter, and here the heart rate is in the range of 250 to 350 per minute. And then we have one more classification of atrial tachy arrhythmia or cardia, and that's atrial fibrillation. And those of you who have attended my prior sessions, you may recall we have discussed this. The heart rate would be, in some literature they would say 350 to 450, in some literature they would say once it is more than 350, that is labeled as AFib or atrial fibrillation. As we know, SA node typically fires and depolarizes both the atriums. In atrial tachy, what really happens is, let's say the atrial tissue other than the SA node, in atrial tissue it fires, and it fires frequently, and once in a while one of the conduction that goes through the AV node down into the ventricles. Okay, so let me draw here the ECG tracing that will be formed during the atrial tachy, and it would make more sense. So you have 1P, 2P, let's say 3P. So the irritated atrium tissue would keep firing, and at one point it would be able to pass through AV node and into the ventricles. So the QRS and T would be formed, and then again you can have multiple identifiable P waves, because we now know P wave represents the atrial depolarization, and then again you would have QRS complex followed by T wave, and then again it continues and you have P waves, then QRS, and then T. It goes like that. So basically what happens, you see P wave, P waves, P waves. So that is what is happening here in atrial tachycardia, that goes anywhere from 125 to 150, the atrial tissue fires more rapidly and quite frequently. So that's why you see on the ECG tracings more and more P being generated. And once in a while it goes through the AV node down into the ventricles, and hence you will see a QRS and T complex, the repolarization also, and then again the atrial depolarization keeps firing the P waves, and it goes on like that. So that's atrial tachy. Now we can have another situation where there is atrial flutter. So in atrial flutter, what happens is this, that it is even faster than atrial tachy. So you will have the heart rate of 250 to 350. So things are fired up in both atriums, and it creates so rapidly that you can have on your ECG tracings something like and then you have QRS T, and then again so these are not actually speaking the P waves, but these are called flutter waves. So these are called the flutter waves. I am not good at drawing, but pick the conceptual meaning behind it. So these are not the P waves, these are the flutter waves. And in atrial flutter, the flutter waves are reflected through big F flutter waves, as opposed to the typical P waves that we have in atrial tachy. Atrial flutter will have flutter waves as opposed to the P waves, because there is a rapid firing that is going on in our atriums of both, and as a result you would have this like a sawtooth shape. Okay, sawtooth shape, flutter waves are generated, and then once in a while it goes through the AV node that generates the QRS, and then the repolarization, the T, and then again it continues. So that's how what happens when we are talking about atrial flutter. Likewise, in AFib, it is the fastest, progressively increasing the rate. So what happens now? Let me go back to correlate. Atrial tachy, the atrial tissue acts like a pacemaker, and that's why we see multiple P waves, because the atrial tissue acts like a pacemaker and it fires. And because atrial depolarization happens rapidly and frequently, that's why clearly distinguishable, identifiable P waves are formed on the ECG tracings. Here it accelerates, and we have irritated atrial tissue or the cycle of re-entry, and it creates or forms what we call sawtooth type waves, that is not exactly or actually the P waves, but the flutter waves. And the heart rate is typically from 250 to 350. Here, what happens? Again, it is increasing progressively. So in AFib, multifoci of the atrium, so multiple tissues anywhere in both the atriums, they they act like a pacemaker and they fire. So both the atriums are firing faster than even the atrial flutter. That's why we see the heart rate over 350. And as we have learned before in our prior sessions, that when the depolarization happens, the cardiac vectors are formed, right? But here they all try to fire up and they don't have any pattern. So they don't synchronize to each other. They can go randomly in any direction without forming any typical or identifiable or a set of patterns. So they are disorganized. There is no synchronization as such. And they all fire together simultaneously. And that's why on the ECG tracing, we will see the baseline like this. And then once in a while you will have a AV node, the electrical activity that goes through the conduction pathway goes through the AV node, and then the ventricles are fired up. So you will have QRST, and then again both atriums will back fire again and again, frequently, rapidly, and then once in a while you will have a QRST, and then it continues like that. You will have more and more, and then again QRST, and likewise. So the baseline fluctuations are caused due to the multiple foci that acts as a pacemaker, and they are disorganized, no particular pattern, and that's why you see this baseline being like that. So again, they are not the P wave, they are called the flutter waves. Okay, and in AFib, they are in medical literature portrayed as small f. So the atrial flutter, the flutter waves are reflected with capital F, AFib reflected with small f, flutter waves. Simple. Everything we are referring to pertains to atrial tachyarrhythmia. It's tachy, faster. It is happening in atriums. So it can be like atrial tachy, progressively gets faster, can lead to atrial flutter, and if it continues, then it may lead to atrial fib. Identifiable, distinguishable P waves followed by QRST, sawtooth shape of flutter waves followed by QRST, AFib, the baseline slightly fluctuates, so you don't have anything identifiable like P waves or like sawtooth flutter waves, and these are the small flutter waves, and that's why those are reflected like this on our ECG tracings. Now conceptually, in cases like this, how in the medical management the goal is to see that if possible, first goal is to try to avoid having this atrial tachy. Okay, so in the medical management they try to use the beta blockers or the calcium channel blockers, or the digitalis. Besides the typical use in addressing the cardiac failure, what the digitalis does, it increases the vagal activity that ultimately leads to slow down the AV node. So what happens is that first they try to see that if they can avoid having the multiple firings like this. So that's the first goal. If that doesn't happen, then the second goal is to see to it that AV node, if there is a way we can slow down the AV node. Otherwise, if AV node doesn't slow down, and if whatever happens in both the atriums, if that goes through the AV node and then it precipitates, there is a possibility that both the ventricles may lead to the ventricular tachy. And if that happens, if ventricular tachy happens, then it is a life-threatening situation. So first they try to see if they can avoid this activity in the atrial, rapid activity in the electrical activity in the both atriums. If that is not a possibility, then they try to slow down the AV node so as to prevent the possible eventual unfortunate event of life-threatening event that we call ventricular tachy. So that's how it works. Step by step, very easy and simple to understand. Atrial tachyarrhythmia. Okay? Not that difficult. Let's take a break here and we'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye now.